Buzz Aldrin has opened up about that iconic moon landing photo. Some 600 million people around the world are glued to their TV sets as the Apollo 11 lander makes its final descent to the moon on July 20, 1969. Neil Armstrong takes humanity's first historic step into the lunar surface, closely followed by Buzz Aldrin. But not everyone accepts the truth of this momentous achievement. Indeed, the whole enterprise has spawned a legion of bizarre conspiracy theories. And years later, Aldrin revealed some surprising facts about his time on the moon. Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. Aldrin's revelations about his moon trip in a 2016 interview centered on one of the color shots taken on the mission by Armstrong. In fact, Armstrong took all the still photos on the moon's surface for the simple reason that he was the one wielding the camera. The many famous shots he got were captured with a high-performance Hasselblad. Of course, the astronauts captured a whole gallery of extraordinary images from this first manned moon landing expedition. That's hardly a surprise, given the momentous accomplishment of those two men setting foot on the moon. For example, there's the amazing shot of Aldrin standing by the Stars and Stripes, saluting his country's flag flying and probably on the moon's surface. A single photograph of Aldrin's boot print in the moon dust is another unforgettable shot. Then there's what's known as the visor image. In that picture of Aldrin facing the camera, we can actually clearly see Armstrong in reflection in the former's helmet visor. Also visible in the reflection is the lunar landing module Eagle. Indeed, one of the many topics Aldrin addressed in an interview staged at the Science Museum in London, England, 2016, was the photography from the moon mission. And as he answered questions, he let slip what we might seem to be a rather startling admission. He went so far as to say that an aspect of the moon landing had been so well staged. Aldrin and Armstrong's successful landing on the moon, with Michael Collins in orbit in the return vehicle, was actually the fulfillment of a commitment made by President John F. Kennedy back in 1961. He told a joint congressional session that America would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Sadly, Kennedy had been dead for nearly 6 years by the time this dream came true. Nevertheless, it was a stirring example of American ambition and know-how. This high-level commitment to expand the U.S. space program came in the context of the Cold War. The conflict between the U.S. and her allies and the Communist bloc, led by the Soviet Union, was a clash of ideologies which sometimes spilled onto the battlefield. One such example was the Korean War. Aldrin actually fought in Korea as a fighter pilot, flying on 66 missions and bringing down 2 enemy MiG jets. Another Cold War front on which the opposing sides competed was the space race. By the time Kennedy had announced the intention to travel to the moon, the Soviets had twice already stolen a significant march on the Americans in space exploration. In 1957, they launched the first orbiting satellite, Sputnik. Then in 1961, the first man into space had been the Russian Yuri Gagarin. It was clear that the U.S. was lagging behind in the space race. The presidential pledge led to an acceleration of NASA's space program, with the Gemini missions running through the 1960s. In fact, Aldrin was one of the astronauts who flew on Gemini 12, the project's final mission, in 1966. In less than 2 years, the program had perfected various operations and maneuvers that would be essential to a future moon landing project. The next step in the plan to put a man on the moon was NASA's Apollo program. It didn't get off to the best of starts. The 3-man crew that was to launch aboard Apollo 1 were all killed when a takeoff practice drill in January 1967 went disastrously wrong. But by October 1968, things were back on track. The next crewed mission, Apollo 7, successfully launched with its 3-man crew and orbited the Earth 163 times. This mission was notable as the first American spaceflight to transmit live TV pictures back to the public. The next Apollo missions, 8, 9, and 10, moved closer to the ultimate goal of landing on the moon. As we know, Aldrin, along with Armstrong and Collins, were the astronauts for the Apollo 11 mission. Armstrong was the mission commander and Collins was the command module pilot. This command ship was the spacecraft that would return the 3 astronauts back to Earth. Aldrin was the pilot of the lunar module, and it was down to him to land it on the moon's surface and return safely to the command module. Powered by its 363-foot-tall Saturn V rocket, Apollo 11 took off from Cape Kennedy in Florida on July 16, 1969. It was one of 4 sections that made up the spaceship, with the other 3 being the Command Module, Columbia, the Lunar Module, Eagle, and a Service Module. Hundreds of thousands had gathered at the base, today known as Cape Canaveral, to watch the 3 astronauts blast off into space. Once the spacecraft had left Earth's atmosphere, it headed to the Moon, using the thrust of the last of the 3 sections that made up the Saturn V rocket. The first had launched them from the ground and remained there, while the second had powered them through the stratosphere. They were on their way. Less than 3 hours after launch came a crucial part of the mission: the separation of the Apollo modules from the Saturn V rocket. The Columbus module also had to separate from the Lunar module, Eagle, to maneuver the 2 into the correct configuration. The 2 parts of the spacecraft then successfully docked back together and set off towards the Moon. A little more than 2 full days of space travel later, the astronauts were in lunar orbit. By now, it was the morning of July 20th, and Aldrin and Armstrong clambered into Eagle, leaving Collins on his own in lunar orbit. The pair prepared to start flying the lunar module down to the Moon's surface. They'd circled the Moon nearly 12 times, and it was time to start their descent to the surface. The first step to the Moon landing was to maneuver the lunar module from a standing orbit to an elliptical one that would bring them as near to the surface as 50,000 feet. At that point, the astronauts used Eagle's engine to start the final controlled descent. At 500 feet from the Moon's surface, Armstrong switched the craft to manual control. At last, the lunar module landed. Armstrong announced this in his immortal message: "Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." The original flight plan had called for a 4-hour rest break before Aldrin and Armstrong prepared to leave their capsule. However, once on the surface, they quickly began to make ready to emerge. In fact, the preparations to leave Eagle took nearly 4 hours. Finally, a little short of 110 hours after leaving Earth, Armstrong stepped onto the rocky terrain of the Moon's Sea of Tranquility. He now radioed another message, which has become a central part of the Moon's landing story. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. In the heat of the moment, he actually forgot the A, which he'd intended to include. About 20 minutes after Armstrong had disembarked from Eagle, Aldrin followed him down the ladder to step onto the Moon's surface. Armstrong had already set up the TV camera so that hundreds of millions of viewers on Earth could witness these extraordinary events on the Moon. The 2 astronauts now began to explore the lunar landscape around Eagle, spending about 2.5 hours outside before returning to the lunar module. In the end, the 2 astronauts spent nearly 22 hours on the surface of the Moon before taking off to dock with Columbus. During their time outside Eagle, they'd taken many outstanding photos, a number of which are published again and again in the press and online. And some of those who claim that the Moon landings never happened use so-called anomalies in the photos as evidence to support their contentions. Self-styled Moon truthers have repeatedly used photos taken by Armstrong to try and prove that the entire Moon landing mission was staged. One example of this is an image that shows shadows on the ground which are apparently not parallel. Those that question the truth of the Apollo 11 mission say this indicates the use of studio lighting, but experts roundly reject this allegation. The website of London's Royal Museum's Greenwich quotes the words of Professor Anu Ojha, the British National Space Academy's director. Speaking about the parallel shadows claim, he explained, "This is on the surface of the Moon, but we can reproduce this effect anytime we want to on Earth. You've all seen this phenomenon yourself, where, because of perspective, parallel lines appear to be non-parallel." Ojha continued, "If you're trying to reduce onto a 2-dimensional plane a 3-dimensional situation, you can make lines do all sorts of weird things. Artists have been using this for centuries." And he goes on to debunk another Moon landing trope involving a photo. In this claim, truthers say that photos from the Moon mission, which include the sky, show no evidence of stars, proving that the astronauts were not really in space.